Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody had a great weekend. And I just have to tell you, I am almost done with all the speeches. I know a couple of them are coming in just a tad bit late. I have to tell you, I was so impressed. I really liked a lot of your speeches. Topic choices were excellent. But what's more is not so much that I love the topics, but I think a lot of the presentations were better than I expected, especially since we haven't had that face-to-face. We haven't been in the classroom. But one of the things I do cherish, and I do, like, they're sacred to me, are those sample outlines. As over the years, gathering these outlines that students have done, really good speeches, and saving them, and being able to pass them on to other students, to think that, you know, a lot of you may have learned to put your speech together thanks to Cecilia, who did her speech over 15 years ago. You know, so a lot of speeches were excellent. Just a couple things, and I did mention this to a bunch of you, because there was like at least 4 or 5 of you that I mentioned a couple of these things to. Number one, let's try to stand, and if we can, as you can see here, let's try to get it at eye level. Okay, this way it's not like you're looking down. I mean, a bunch of you had your camera or device so far low, it almost looked like that, you know, here you are, and yet the camera was down almost at your knee level, and you were looking straight down. And it's a kind of a weird effect when you're delivering a speech. And also, let's try to, you know, like I have right now, I'm in my kitchen dining room combo. So I have the dining room table here, and I have the table in front of me. That's where you would put your outline. And a couple of it, there was at least 4 or 5 of you who either began their speech fine, or from the beginning of your speech had, at least in one hand, your outline. And I don't want that to happen because it can be very distracting. But what's more is if you can put it down, sure, you can just look down, refer to it, bring it here, look down, bring it here. Okay, but what it does is it stops you from really employing those illustrators, gestures, whatever it is that you want to use with your hands, which can really have an effect on the words that you're saying. So for the next speech, let's try to do like eye level, and make sure you have those hands free. Okay, again, if you just happen to glance down to just pick up where you are, because basically when you put these speeches together, organize it, type it out, and then practice it at least 3 times, you have a general idea of what you're going to be saying. So if you're just in the middle of a speech, you just have to refer down and then bring it back up here. That's fine. That's fine. So most of your speeches, many of you have already gotten your grades back, and I'd say overall they were very good. You know, for a first speech, especially in the sense where, you know, we weren't face-to-face. You know, my spring semester, we had just stopped. We went on spring break just after the informative speeches. And of course, we haven't been back since spring break. So this worked out really well. And I'm happy. But now it's time to move on. And by the way, 3 weeks down, only 3 weeks to go. And these next 3 weeks are going to fly. They always do. All right. Well, now the next part we're going to talk about is a part of communication that I really take seriously, especially because I'm one of the few people that you're going to find in your faculty who did work extensively for years in the private sector. Okay, and one of the things that I found in the private sector is one of the things that you do a lot is you sit down and you work in groups. Okay, and a group is an assemblage of people who are looking to, you know, achieve a goal, or, you know, come up with a solution to a problem, whatever it is that you're coming together for. And you want to make sure that you're communicating effectively with one another in order to accomplish that goal. Okay? In order to come up with a solution to that problem. And that's the purpose of a group. And you don't want to have too few, but you don't want to have too many. Okay? One of the reasons why, I would say the ideal number for a group is between 5 and 7 people. So 5 people, 6 people, 7 people, those are the ideal numbers, because at least 5, you have an ability to cover a wide spectrum of ideas. Whereas if you have more than 7, then you have a little trouble here. Because now you're going to have trouble getting everyone to be able to do what is actually the goal of a group. In order for a group to be successful, you must establish equal and active participation. I mean, if someone puts 5 people in a group, what they're expecting is all 5 people to equally and actively participate. Because you're trying to get spectrum of ideas from 5 different people. Now, if you put a group together of 4 or 5 people and only 1 or 2 people do all the work and the other 3 people don't do anything, well, then it's not a group, it's a duo. If you have a group of 6 people and only 3 people do all the work and the other 3 people don't, no, that's not a group, that's a trio. Okay? But when you have a group together, 4, 5, 6 people, and everyone is equally and actively participating, then you have what's considered to be a solid group. All right? And you want to be able to communicate effectively. Now, we're going to get into more about you as a participant tomorrow. But what I focus on today is some of the different types of groups that there are. For example, work teams is one of the first ones they mention in your textbook. And we've all been members of work teams. And there's all different type of work teams. I mean, just some of the examples. One of my first students that I had in the spring of 2000. In the spring of 2000, this is going back 20 years ago, I taught the first Com-100 class over at the Ciarco Center in Hackensack. And it was a morning class, started at 8 o'clock, and one of the young ladies who took the class there took my class because right after class, if you know Hackensack, she would go down the street in Main Street and she would work at the Sears that used to, I think it's still there, I don't think it's there anymore, the Sears, on Main Street in Hackensack. And she was in charge of the women's department. So she would tell us in class how whenever the big sales were coming up, whether it was the Labor Day sale, Memorial Day sale, or of course the big one, Black Friday, one person from each department would get into a boardroom and they'd go ahead and trade ideas back and forth on how to best push, like how do you best schedule your people for the sale? How do you best push your sale items? How do you best display those items that need to get unloaded so you can put the new items in? All kinds of different ideas that they would go ahead and bounce back and forth, and they would do that quite frequently. All right, even the smallest bank branches. I've been in bank branches that are so small they only have like 2 or 3 tellers and 1 loan officer with 1 desk. Yet in the back room, there's a conference room. Now, typically, that table back there has usually got the Dunkin' Donuts, and there's a little white powder on there. It's Dunkin' Donuts, that white powder. But they got the white powder from the Dunkin' Donuts. But yet, after they close those doors, if they have to have a meeting, okay, you clean off the table, and you've got your conference table, and you're able to meet. As a matter of fact, if you're at Bergen, we have at least, especially in the administration wing, we have at least 2 conference rooms on each floor. And if you don't believe me how important group communication is for a business or a company, if you go down the street from Bergen Community College, you go south on Route 4, on Paramus Road, you go over Route 4, and then right before the Parkway, you have those office buildings on the right, the ones that were featured in the first episode of The Sopranos. Go to every floor. There's at least 2 conference rooms on every floor of those office buildings, because that's important to have those. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why I really think group work is important is over the years, you know, especially thanks to social media, keeping in contact with students, you of course get your associate's or bachelor's degree in something that you really want to do, but a lot of times you don't get a job right away. And so what do? You go into sales. You grab something while you're sending your resumes out to try to get a job in the major that you had. And yet with sales, not only do sales teams meet once a week sometimes they meet every morning. They'll have a group meeting every morning before they quote-unquote hit the pavement. And that's been a lot of students at Bergen, just to get them by until they can go ahead and get the dream job that they want with their, the career that they want with their degree. So there's a lot of different places, and I know in the private sector, in the different jobs that I've had, especially in radio and television, did a lot of group work. A lot of group work. So work teams can be very good. But also, it could be study groups. One of the things I always push on students, and it's a little difficult now when we don't have a campus, but I always push study groups. All right? And one of the reasons why I push study groups, when you're sitting in a classroom and you're following a professor, all right, and the professor's talking about chapter 3. Now, you're listening, but then you know what? Sometimes you go ahead and you doze off. And I don't mean doze off in a way that, or you zone out. That's what it is. And what I mean by zone out is your mind just goes away for a moment. Especially if you happen to be sitting next to an open, window where you can see outside, okay? And you're watching a squirrel scurrying around, getting nuts, or you start thinking about things that are happening for the weekend. And you take about 2 or 3 minutes and then you come back. Well, now you're studying for a test. And as you're going over chapter 3, and you're thinking, okay, I know she talked about this, this, and this for chapter 3. That's going to be on the exam. And then you take the exam, and all the questions about chapter 3 is not about this, this, or this. It's all about that. Well, you didn't study that, and you get all the questions wrong. Now, why did you get all the questions wrong? Why did you feel that that wouldn't be on there? Oh, she didn't go over that. Yes, she did. She did go over that, but it was during the time that you were zoning out. Yet, if you're in a group with 3 or 4 other people, you can go ahead and say to these 3 other people that you're studying with, yeah, you know what? This, this, and this from chapter 3, I remember her doing that. That's going to be on the exam. But then somebody across from you, because typically students don't zone out at the same time. You zone out at different parts. Somebody across from you can say, well, yeah, but don't forget she talked about that. And you're like, when? Yeah, don't you remember 2 weeks ago? And of course, you're looking at this person like they're crazy because you don't remember her talking about this 2 weeks ago. And then you realize, oh, that's probably when I was zoning out thinking about snowboarding down up in Mountain Creek. Yeah, you know what? You're right. She did talk about that, yeah. And of course, you then go ahead, study, and you ace your exam. So I've always been a big proponent of study groups. There are also, of course, support groups that are also known as growth groups. Those are always big in our society. And of course, when I ever ask students, what's an example of a support group or a growth group? The first one everybody comes up with is AA. And of course, whether it's Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Smokers Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, a lot of them that deal with addictions are great, especially AA, because when you get in that group, everyone in that group has been in your shoes. Everyone's been there and knows exactly what you're going through. So when you're sitting in that group and you can go back and forth, you could really get a lot of good information to help you on your road to hopefully you never fully recover what they say, but at least to be a recovering alcoholic. So those groups, or especially, I work with several support groups, growth groups that deal with veterans. With my Marine Corps League detachment, or even here at Bergen, as the chair or the former chair of the Veterans Committee at Bergen. We work with a lot of different veterans groups that are there as support groups or growth groups. But the one I want to talk about right now is the kind of group that a lot of people overlook, but is very much important to group communication, and that is the family. A lot of people will overlook the family and not even consider it, but yet effective group communication is necessary when working in the family. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, what family? Well, what do we talk about? We talk about where we're going to, yeah, talking about where you're going on vacation, absolutely. There are those of you lucky enough, unlike myself, and I say unlike myself because when I went on vacation as a kid, it was a week, we went to a week down in Seaside. I got $2 in quarters, which meant I could play 8 games because back then, the wheels and stuff on the boardwalk and Seaside were only a quarter. And I was happy. But yeah, you might have dinner one night, clear the table, everyone comes back to the kitchen or dining room table, and then the question gets asked, all right, where are we going on vacation this year? Everyone throws in their ideas until there's one idea that everyone seems to agree on. But there are other different situations. Some of them are really good. For example, you might be planning, say, a 20th anniversary party for your parents or a 25th wedding anniversary for your parents. And it's you and one of your other siblings and maybe an aunt and uncle, another aunt who's helping out. And you guys got to sit down. Usually it takes you about 8 or 9 months worth of meetings to plan this out effectively so that when your mom and dad walk into the room and everybody says, surprise, your mother has that mascara running down her cheeks. Oh, my children are so beautiful. To get that moment perfect usually takes several months worth of effective group meetings. But the kind of meeting I want to talk about is one that maybe a lot of you have been seeing often. And I do get some really good examples from students. If you're right now watching this video as a college student, if your grandparents are still alive, more than likely they're now retired. And unfortunately, maybe your grandfather has passed. Well, now your grandmother, bless her soul, beautiful woman, but unfortunately she can't really live by herself anymore. So now the decision has to come up, well, what do we do with mama? All right. So maybe now it's a Saturday night, maybe you celebrated some birthdays, your cousin's birthday, your aunt and uncle's anniversary, whatever. And then after you've had dinner, everybody comes back to the table, and it's usually your mom and dad, one aunt and uncle, the other aunt and uncle, and now the decision, the question is, what are we going to do with mama? And one of the things that I have found out is they talk about this in Chapter 9 in your textbook. And that is one of the most important parts about group communication is giving yourself the appropriate amount of time to come up with that solution to the problem, to come up with that goal that you want to accomplish in a group, and making sure that you give yourself that appropriate amount of time. And in the family, sometimes it takes a long while getting everyone together, even if it's through things like this where you use Zoom or WebEx or whatever it is, FaceTime, whatever it is that you can get everybody together to go ahead and get that meeting put together, where you can have this discussion, everything's put out on the table. So, for your 15 points, which are due by 7 p.m. tonight, this is what I want you to do. Is I want you to write about a 5 or 6 sentence paragraph telling me about the last family meeting that you saw. And typically, if it's one about whether it deals with your grandparents or dealing with an older relative or that kind of thing, because that's where the real serious meetings come. Tell me who was at the meeting and tell me why you felt the group meeting was either effective or ineffective. All right? So that's going to be due by 7 p.m. tonight for your 15 points. Just tell me about that group meeting in your family, whether you think it was effective or ineffective and why. And plus, who was present? Like, was it aunts or uncles? Was it just, typically if it's just the one side of the family, it might be just, like say if it's your dad's mom, it might be just your dad's siblings or whatever. And sometimes your children, you guys, you're 21, 22, 23 years old. Some of you are by now. Maybe you were included in the discussion, able to propose solutions, that kind of thing. So I really want to hear about this because I really want to hear how these groups worked and whether they worked well, or like one student, and I'll tell you, this was about 4 years ago, a young lady told this story in class where, her family, she had a grandmother. And after the grandfather had died, the grandmother couldn't live by herself anymore. So they were going to put her house up for sale. And then it was her mother's mother, and her mother had 3 siblings. And of course, the spouses would get involved. So you have about 8 people that would be meeting. She said after a year, they must have met about 5 or 6 times. Nothing had been resolved. The mother was just bouncing from house to house without really having a permanent residence. And the house that the grandmother lived in, that they were going to put up for a sale, had sat empty for a year, and they hadn't even contacted a realtor yet. And I just felt so bad, because if this young lady's parents and aunts and uncles had gotten their heads together and really taken the time to discuss this poor young lady could have probably, after they sold the grandmother's house, probably could have got some money to pay for her class. I felt so bad, but it was after a year, and they still hadn't even put the house up for sale yet. So give me an idea. And that's due by 7 o'clock tonight. So you guys have a terrific day, and I'll talk to you soon.